Thanks for coming, guys. This is an overview of the Greater Yellowstone Botanical Tour, the history of the project, where we are today, and where we hope to be in the future. And we have a wonderful guest, Raylene McCalman, who has been instrumental in making this project grow, pun intended. Sorry, work. And she's going to talk a lot about the garden and in that respect as well. And then Jane's going to talk about interpretive offerings and the work that her team is doing. It's a lot to also make this project grow. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction and talk about really how valuable this project is to the museum. A lot of people may see a disconnect between plants and art, but really they're very closely related. We see this garden as a celebration of place, as a celebration of this vital ecosystem that people all over the world come to see. And without native plants, the foundation of life in this place, none of the wildlife that we celebrate that is featured in artwork in the museum would exist. And in fact, the habitat types and landscapes that we see in the museum in the artwork are all featured here in this landscape physically on this place. So when we were started to conceive of this project, and I will say that Jane has had interns in the past who have created a wonderful native plants brochure that we have had available for visitors in the past. And we thought about having a native plants garden on the museum grounds, but we never really had the capacity or knowledge to make it happen. So in Teton Botanical Garden, Trevor Bloom, who is one of the leads for that nonprofit, as well as Raylene and others, approached us with the idea of making this happen. We thought, well, these are the experts. We can really get this off the ground. So that was 2 years ago. And since then, we've made great strides. Teton Conservation District has given us 2 grants to make this project happen, and Raylene can talk about other sponsors and partners. So we have support from the community, and truly this is a really wonderful opportunity to bring awareness to the museum, to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and to the importance and value of native plants in this landscape. So I will briefly talk about, and you can help me on this, the project on the hillside here. There's been a little confusion about what this is, what are all those stakes, what is the museum's involvement in this, and I'll briefly read something that Trevor Bloom, community ecologist for the Nature Conservancy and one of our great partners, wrote about this research project, which is a big deal. And I'll go on to explain why, but he says, this is short: climate change is increasing invasive species and wildfire risk in the Greater Yellowstone. We will demonstrate restoration best practices on 16 acres of sagebrush steppe, which burned in 2019, and with partners published the first restoration best practice manual that addresses climate adaptation for the region. The site at the National Museum of Wildlife Art is a key wildlife corridor to the National Elk Refuge. Using the site and guide, along with workshops and media tools, we will demonstrate and communicate to thousands the feasibility of climate adaptation, ultimately influencing regional practices that improve wildlife habitat and reduce fire risk. So they're trying to do research that will help write the manual that people in this entire region will use for restoration work, climate change work, and feasibility. So it's huge. And Carrie Schwartz, you guys all know Carrie, has friends who work for the Forest Service in Utah who know about this project. It's wide-ranging, and it's really important. So, and you can talk more probably about that than I can, but just to let you know that important work is being done on the museum grounds. And this is bringing awareness to the museum, to partners and ecologists throughout the region. And Trevor is hosting and organizing a restoration summit here on museum grounds, the 6th through the 8th, that will include events, presentations, hands-on work throughout the day that relate to native plant restoration and cheatgrass mitigation. So it will be all outside, and you can probably talk more about that too. But just to let you know that that's happening as well, and it's open to the public, so we'll send out more information about that when it becomes more cemented, but just know that that's coming up. And exciting partners: the Shoshone-Bannock Tribe, Teton County Weed and Pest, University of Wyoming, Colorado State University, the Forest Service, Park Service, and more. So we are the grounds for that, which is really awesome. So I will not talk more. I'll let Raylene and Jane take it away.
So I'll just add a little bit more about the restoration efforts that are taking place up on the hillside. We've got 3 different plots, and we're going to, without getting too granular in detail, we're measuring pre and post treatment in these 3 different plots, and we're taking different approaches in each plot. So we'll get to see which model we use is going to be the most effective in restoring native plants and eliminating the cheatgrass. The other thing about the summit, the restoration summit, we're going to be doing a massive planting outside of those plots up on the hillside with approximately 3,000 plugs of big mountain sage and antelope bitterbrush. So that a couple of days right before the summit, so starting I think on the 4th. And we are going to be needing volunteers for that. So we'll have more information about that. We'll be picking up a lot of those plant materials from a nursery in Rexburg, and then also Piney Island, who provided all of our native plant plugs that we put in this spring. They'll be coming down also again with more plants, and when we go by the moose sculpture, I'll talk about that installation. That's going to go in sometime this fall.
So thank you. Mm-hmm. And I also want to shout out to Victor, Ernesto, Robert, and his crew, because you have maintained these grounds for years. And thank you for that. This is just, complimenting the work that you have already done to care for this place. So thank you guys.
Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the planted zones.
Okay.
Maybe I'll just do a quick overview,
okay,
and then you can jump in with more specifics. Great. But yes, and this relates to the work Victor, Ernesto, Robert have all done. You'll notice some cordage here with the stakes. These are all areas where new plantings went in early this summer. And if you look all the way down that way, you'll see it continues all the way to the end of the aspen trees. That's a big wildflower planting area. It continues up here. It continues up to the Isis sculpture. And then if you so that's all wildflower. We've established 3 main areas for plant interpretation. One is wildflower meadow. And if you look at this map over here, you'll see a little icon with a flower indicating which areas around the sculpture trail are dedicated to the wildflowers. You'll also see an icon for sagebrush dedicated to interpreting the sagebrush steppe, which is another major section or area that we're talking about. And then finally, Aspen Grove, thank you. The Aspen Grove areas, such as down there, there's a stand of aspens. Up here, there's a stand of aspens. Down on the south section of the trail, stand of aspens, and that's another ecosystem area that we interpret. There's also the fire. The fire is interpreted on this sign right here.
And the pollinator.
And the pollinator, thank you. And then if you keep going up to the north past Isis, you'll see on the left there's some bigger fencing up to protect that area, and it is a pollinator garden, specifically bushes, flowers, plants that attract butterflies, hummingbirds, different pollinators. That project is specifically a Girl Scout project. There's a Girl Scout from New York who is getting her Golden Project, I think it's called. It's like the Eagle Scout project for Boy Scouts, but it's the Girl Scouts version of that. And she has worked with local Girl Scouts. She came in and was helping plant that area with the local Girl Scouts, and there will be interpretation for that coming. And then, other areas. If you go down the gravel footpath by the Stuart Steinhauer Buffalo Mountain sculptures, you'll see plants will be coming up all along the right-hand side. If you're going downhill, it's the right-hand side. If you keep going and you get to the Palette Restaurant Terrace, there are native plants in those planter boxes as well.
And also all through that meadow.
Oh, and all through, right?
Between the planter boxes and the bear
Yep.
sculpture.
Yep.
So that whole lawn area is peppered with all kinds of wildflowers.
Right.
And Raylene, how many flowers would you estimate that you planted? How many plugs?
In the spring planting, we installed approximately 2,000 plugs all through, all the zones. And those 2,000 plugs represent about 30, or representing 30 different species of native wildflowers. And so I still have about 200 plugs that weren't ready to go in yet. So I have goldenrod and blazing star that need to go in at some point between now and fall. So we'll be back and be doing a few more plantings. And then this fall, we'll be doing the moose installation. And we also have more willow and some other shrubs that we're going to be putting in various places just to kind of fill in.
But what I mostly wanted to emphasize before I turn it over to Raylene to talk about what flowers you will see coming up next summer, because when she says plugs, she means tiny little plants. And there's not much to see right now. So you may look over here and say, well, it looks about the same as I remember it looked. That's because they're tiny plants. By next summer, we expect to see them blooming, and it's going to look a lot different.
Yeah.
But it's really, really important while the plants are small that we don't walk on these areas, that we remind visitors to please not walk on these areas, that we don't spray herbicides in these areas. These are really vulnerable at this stage, and they're going to be beautiful next summer, but we need everybody's help to protect them, and that's why we're so grateful that this has all been flagged and protected in this way. Of course, we all know visitors will step over flagging, and we've seen that already, but if everybody helps out, we think we can protect these plants. The last thing I want to say is, let's see, we talked about the plants down there, we talked about not walking. I think, Raylene, at this point, if you could name some of the plants that people expect to see, and I think we should walk down to the moose and talk about what's going in there in the fall. But if you could name some of the plants and point out some of the areas, that would be great.
Right. Okay. So as Jane mentioned before, we've got 3 basic ecotype zones represented along the sculpture trail. And within each of those zones, we've tried to replicate what we might anticipate seeing in the way of wildflowers and native shrubs. And so within the aspen grove in particular, we have some of the cooler loving flowers like columbine. But we also have some of the lower growing plants that you might see, like pussy toes. They have the silvery kind of furry leaves. And when they do flower, they send up these little stalks from the basal rosettes that you see down on the ground, and they have these fuzzy little white blooms on top of those stalks. Same is true with the sulfur flower buckwheat. It's a low-growing plant that you'll see, and it kind of spreads out, turns its green foliage, but in the fall, the foliage turns red. And during the peak flower season, which here is in July, the sulfur flower buckwheat will throw up a similar umbrella like the pussy toes, and those flowers will be a brilliant sulfur yellow. So we've got the low-growing plants that will throw up the aerial shoots. Then we have more of the recognizable plants like the Indian paintbrush, which is a red flower that will start coming up in June. We also had put in a sulfur paintbrush, which will be a yellow flower. And the paintbrushes all tend to start to come up in June and July and will continue to flower through the summer into the fall. Some other ones, I'll talk about some shrubs. Also in both the wildflower meadow and the aspen grove, we've got woods rose, so that's our wild rose that grows here. And we actually installed quite a few of those last fall, which we saw they were all doing really well this year. So those will have a pink flower. They're going to grow much taller than a lot of the wildflowers that we planted. We also have put in snowberry, which those were put in, some of those were put in the fall, last fall, and we'll probably install a few more of those this fall. They are another sort of medium height growing shrub, and they have white berries that they put out in the fall, which these berries are really important wildlife food for the ecosystem. So that's another type of plant that is represented. There's also chokecherry and serviceberry that have been put in. Again, kind of medium height size shrubs that produce berries that are important food sources for wildlife and for humans too. And then we could probably start walking towards the moose. And along the way, I may point out some of the installation that we did this spring. There are some that are currently flowering right over here, so I can point those out. And then we'll talk about the moose installation.
And I will say Raylene is an ethnobotanist, so she's been helping us write about traditional uses of these plants. And Jane will talk more about the mobile tour, but that information is also included.
And as we walk past, check out this sign. There's another one off the restaurant terrace down below, near the owl sculpture, near the spotting skulls down there.
Basically,
The two signs have different information.
That kid just said the sign was epic.
Nice. Okay, so right here we've got one of our spring installations, the black-eyed Susan. And if you look really close, trying to find, I know we've got some penstemons in here. Probably there's goldenrod coming up, so this yellow flower right here. This was already here, but we're going to install more of these. Oh, that's goldenrod too. Let's see if we can find some of these really tiny little plugs. We're probably going to come through and clear out some of these aspen runners, just because they will crowd out a lot of the smaller plugs.
And if we fast forward the clock something like 5 years, just the array of color and variety and texture on this landscape will be incredible. So
Yeah.
look forward to that.
So just a quick note along those lines, some of these plants will take longer to flower, a couple of years before they actually mature than some of the others. So what you'll see kind of a gradation of development through this landscape as these plants mature. So all in this area is wildflower meadow as well. So if everybody looks out in that direction, you see kind of a leafy plant that's starting to spread. That's a milk vetch. That was one of the plugs that we put in the spring. So that one should flower next spring. So there's a lot more in here that aren't really noticeable yet, but the faster growing ones are the ones that you'll see come up this next spring and flower. Okay, so this coming fall, we're going to be putting in a moose habitat installation right behind the moose here, which is going to be very cool. Up on the swale in the back, we're going to build a depression, get some irrigation in there, and we'll have 4 or 5 different varieties of willow in there, probably a few other shrubs, and a variety of wildflowers that we would expect to see in a riparian habitat, which is the preferred habitat for moose. So we don't have an installation date set yet. We need to make sure that we've got our irrigation in first. But this is going to be really a beautiful addition to the entire tour.
Sure. So what I wanted to talk about, well, while we're here, I'm just going to point out some other areas. So this footpath here that starts up by the Buffalo Mountain sculpture continues down. There are plantings all along this side, not the highway side, but this side of that. Lots of new plantings. And then if you continue across the bridge and get over by the restaurant, there you will see the planters with native plants. If you haven't been out there, check them out. They're doing really well. Those were, some of them planted a year ago and some planted early this summer. So actually some seeds were put in right before fall, in the fall last year. So those are doing great. And those are part of the interpretation, as well as, like Raylene said, towards the bear sculpture, that's all planted with little tiny plant plugs as well. Is it okay if I jump in and talk about the audio tour that's coming now? So another thing that we've been working on is a huge audio tour that will be for the native plants. It will be on our same platform as the other audio tours, Museum. It will be in addition to the sculpture audio tour that is out here already. The audio tour is really close to being done. It has like 27 stops, I think. It talks about not only the plant zones and some of the plants in each of these zones we've talked about, but it also relates to the artwork in the museum's collection. So in other words, when we talk about wildflowers in the wildflower meadow, there are some visual images of paintings from our collection that show wildflowers. When we talk about the aspens, there are aspens in paintings. So hopefully people, if they start out here, they will get excited about what we have inside and then decide to come inside. It's, like I said, it's pretty close to being done. The script is done, all the English voices, which would be me, Raylene, Trevor, and Lisa, the English-speaking people, that's done. The Spanish-speaking voices, that's done. Carrie Schwartz is just doing the final editing now. It will be done probably this fall, but I think we're going to wait then until the spring to unveil it because nobody's out here on the trail in the winter and in the late fall. But we're really excited about that interpretive piece that's coming. Another interpretive element you will see out here next summer will be little signs that go in the ground, and it will say, you know, stop number 15, Aspen Grove, or stop number, 10, Indian Paintbrush Wildflower Meadow. So that will be coming next summer as well, another interpretive piece.
Jane, can I add to that real quick?
Yeah.
And so as we're talking about habitat types that will be expounded on in the mobile tour and other interpretive offerings, we can really see this garden as a microcosm of some of the most important ecosystems in the greater Yellowstone. So for example, if this garden was at its fullest during the sage grouse exhibit, we could tell people to come out here and experience that landscape firsthand and learn about it. So it's a physical experience of these landscapes that you see visually inside the museum, which is a wonderful connection to us.
Great. I think this is a good time for questions. Okay. Yeah. What questions do you all have? We want to try to stick to our time, which is like 3 minutes left.
Out of those 2,000 plugs, what percentage are making?
that's a question I can't really answer, but what I will add is that we increased the irrigation through the installation areas right at the time of planting, which has made a huge difference. I've come and checked on several different areas occasionally since, and even with the brutal heat that we had this summer, everything looks pretty good. There are going to be some losses, that's inevitable, but I think based on what I've been observing since we did the installation, everything looks really great.
Other questions?
Were those 2,000 plugs, were those by hand?
Yes. What the plugs came in these cones, so they were maybe about 2 inches in diameter and maybe about 6 or 7 inches deep. And we had a tool called a dibble stick that the end of it was in the same shape as the cone, and we just stomped those into the ground. Sometimes we were grinding them into the ground, and it made an impression that the cone just fit right into. So we did all of that by hand.
And we had museum volunteers, and we had volunteers from Teton Botanical.
We had
Garden.
People from Teton Conservation District.
Right.
We had museum volunteers. We had
Girl Scouts.
Girl Scouts. We had and there were a couple of community school. I can't remember the name of the school. The community school here in Jackson. A couple of teachers brought their family and students one day, and they were instrumental in getting rid of a lot of that yellow clover that keeps coming up. They did an awesome job.
So thank you all for coming today, but also for helping us keep people off of those areas, and also for being around next spring and summer when it starts to get even more exciting around here.
Thank you.
We're done.
Thanks, Raylene.
Thank you for coming out today and all of the hard work that you've done, Jane, staff. I mean, it's exciting to watch.
It's been a real team effort. This has been so exciting.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.